The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
You know, we've been talking about this controversy, growing controversy, involving the chair of the Democratic National Committee, Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. Initially, it was just sort of casually mentioning as the Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton Democratic primary got going. Well, Debbie Wasserman-Schultz was the co-chair of Hillary Clinton's 2008 campaign. I wonder if she would be a fair arbiter of a Democratic primary, given that Hillary is running and she used to work for Hillary. And then it became very clear around, starting with the number of Democratic debates, trying to keep that number low, keep that number small, the scheduling of debates in the middle of 3-day weekends and at the same time as big sporting events. It started to become pretty clear that she was putting her hand on the scales for Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primary. And then this escalated with the handling of some specific primaries and caucuses, the suspension of Bernie Sanders' access to the DNC's shared voter database, setting up this joint fundraising committee with the Hillary Clinton campaign. And we recently heard from Bernie Sanders campaign manager Jeff Weaver that that Debbie Wasserman-Schultz has been actively working against Bernie Sanders for what he characterized as personal reasons. Let's step back from that a little bit, because we've now learned that Democrats more broadly, including even some Democratic senators backing Hillary Clinton for president, are worried that Debbie Wasserman-Schultz has become too toxic and too divisive to realistically unify the party at the Democratic National Convention, which is going to be really important to defeat Donald Trump in November, if indeed he is going to be defeated. I have a quote from a pro-Clinton Democratic senator who said that there have been meetings over the last 2 days specifically about booting Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. Quote, "There have been a lot of meetings over the past 48 hours about what color plate do we deliver Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's head on. I don't see how she can continue to the election. How can she open the convention? Sanders supporters would go nuts." Other sources are saying that if there's going to be a deal for Debbie Wasserman-Schultz to step down, that it's not going to happen until there's a sort of broader deal involving Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton in terms of how to proceed with a Democratic nominee, likely Hillary Clinton, in a way that brings the party together. And the suggestion, Lewis, is that as part of that deal, it would be negotiated that Debbie Wasserman-Schultz steps down or at least takes a very backseat role at the Democratic National Convention. The Clinton and Sanders campaigns already struck one deal where Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's role in the convention's platform committee is reduced. She could have gotten to pick all 15 members of the platform committee. Instead, she's allowed to pick only 4. I don't know where this will go, but I agree. I don't know that Debbie Wasserman-Schultz staying is good for the party.
Right. I mean, this election cycle, though, the damage is done, right?
You think?
Well, of course.
There's a strong sentiment that if she sticks around, that whatever messiness is going to take place at the DNC, and that's sort of a reference to something Bernie Sanders recently said, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that she's just going to exacerbate the messiness and tension that there might be. She's stepped in it a bunch of times during this process, there's no doubt. But I question whether, given the increasingly polarized nature of Bernie versus Hillary, if any DNC chair would have avoided the shrapnel. I get that Debbie Wasserman-Schultz specifically has been under fire for the co-fundraising with Hillary Clinton, the debate stuff, the DNC voter database. There's been a whole bunch of things that she's been criticized for. But given where this has gone, I have no doubt that some elements of the Democratic primary voters would be angry with whoever was the DNC chair, if not for things that they did do, for things that they didn't do.
No doubt. You're not going to keep everyone happy. I mean, although the chair is probably although there's pressure coming from all sorts of people within the party, you're probably in the place where it's easiest to say, look, I have to remain impartial and unbiased here and just do my job.
Well, but she claims to have done that, although it's transparent.
It's very clear she has not done that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Also, I question whether Debbie Wasserman-Schultz stepping down is even more than a symbolic thing. It strikes me as a sort of hollow move if she even were to do it. But there are bigger issues about Hillary versus Trump anyway that go well beyond the DNC and Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. But in reality, if she steps down, as Lewis is saying, whatever damage you ascribe to Debbie Wasserman-Schultz has been done. And it seems like it would be mostly symbolic. And it does get to this issue of the convention potentially being messy, which is what I want to talk about next. There's this broader issue of whether there will or won't be a contested Democratic National Convention. Now, contested can mean two things, and I've talked to you about this. Number one, the sort of colloquial meaning of contested would be neither Bernie Sanders nor Hillary Clinton clinch the nomination with 2,383 pledged delegates before the convention. This would be a nominally contested convention, but it could still be decided on the first round of voting at the convention, right? Nobody comes in already with the required number of pledged delegates. They do one vote, and on that first ballot, somebody wins. Looking at the numbers today, likely Hillary. Some people are calling that contested, but historically speaking, that's not really what we mean when we say a contested convention. That's scenario number two, which is nobody reaches 2,383 delegates even after the first ballot has been taken, which includes superdelegates actually voting. This is not very likely. Let me be abundantly clear about that. But it is possible. But there are lots of other possibilities which are possible, right? For example, there's a winner after the first vote, presumably, as I said, Hillary Clinton, but Bernie Sanders supporters and the superdelegates that do support Bernie Sanders stage a protest or a floor fight over particular issues. And this is how conflict could really start at the Democratic National Convention. Bernie Sanders has been framed by detractors as supporting violence at the DNC. Bernie Sanders has said unequivocally that he condemns any and all forms of violence. The issue now is that he recently said to an Associated Press reporter during an interview, quote, "Democracy is not always nice and quiet and gentle." And he also said that things could get messy at the convention if the party doesn't become more inclusive. So there are a number of different feelings about Bernie Sanders saying this and saying that he is going to stick it out all the way through the convention. Some flat out don't like Bernie Sanders and want him out. I don't believe that that's the majority of Democrats at this time, or even close to it. There are those who say Bernie's role is very, very important, but the longer he stays in, the better it is for Trump, because Trump can start campaigning against Hillary now, whereas Hillary still has to deal with Bernie until there's an official nominee. And to them, I say, number one, I reject that at its face. I've not seen any compelling evidence that a longer primary hurts the party in November. But number two, it's a little bit condescending to say Bernie is just so annoying, making Hillary campaign against him for now instead of against Trump. That's incredibly presumptuous and anti-democratic.
But it's not that Hillary has to do much to beat Bernie. It seems she's going to anyway.
You think
And
mathematically at this point it's a pretty clear path, yeah?
It's pretty clear. So I don't think she has to try too hard. From her rhetoric as of late, it seems she's already basically just campaigning against Trump, right?
Mostly, yeah. In many ways. So what is the messiness that could happen at the convention? Could it be that there's going to be a forced floor fight no matter what the results of the first ballot are? Is the messiness going to be the protests outside of the DNC that we've been increasingly talking about and catching wind of? And Lewis, as you know, in working out logistics for the DNC, we are increasingly seeing much more attention and time being paid to security issues and concerns. I don't know what the messiness is necessarily that Bernie Sanders is talking about. It could be a pretty fascinating Democratic National Convention, but the real question is, will it strengthen the party or will it hurt the party? And depending on who you talk to on what particular day, the opinions on this are pretty varied.
Yeah, I'm not so concerned about damaging the party, strengthening the party.
I'm not either.
The party's a mess, and it's rather corrupt, as we just discussed. And who cares about the party? Let's do away with parties.
Well, but okay, fair enough. But I think when sometimes people talk about strengthening or weakening the party, what they're referring to is hurting or helping the eventual nominee's chances to defeat Donald Trump in November. I'm reframing it in terms of what it actually means practically, and there's no doubt that that's important.
It's important, yeah, I suppose, but is this kind of conflict actually going to determine the outcome of the election?
I don't believe it is.
No, it's not going to.
I've seen no evidence that an extended or contentious primary, I've said this before and I'll repeat it, will actually determine whether it's more likely that Donald Trump will win in November. If you disagree, if you think a longer Democratic primary actually does help Donald Trump, send me something that is data-driven or empirical, because I've been able to find nothing. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at Louis Motami.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Ben Friedman. Ben, thank you so much for supporting alternatives to corporate media. Ben signed up at davidpakman.com/membership, where you can also sign up. And I will tell you later on today what we have scheduled for you in our members only bonus show. But I don't want to delay any further, because today is a very special day. We have Hatriot Mail for you.
Hatriot Mail, your break from the tyranny of unbiased, independent media. Because knowledge and information are just communist conspiracies. Hatriot Mail, written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
All right. I love it when we receive a critique for A and the opposite of A. I think you'll understand what I mean when you hear this week's Hatriot Mail. And of course, the just bizarre use or attempt to use the English language to communicate meaning via text. It is amazing in this one. Take a look.
Wow, unstubbed, LMAO. I subbed too fast, LMAO. Is this channel f***ing support goddamn dumbass Democrats, OMG? Buy another The Young Turks. Entertainment, not truth, f*** you posers.
Yeah, so the A and opposite of A thing, we sometimes get criticized for being too much like the Young Turks. Like, for example, this Hatriot Mail said, "This is yet another The Young Turks. Bye-bye. The guy was unstubbing from our channel," whatever that means. And then often we're criticized because we're not enough like the Young Turks. We get hate mail from people saying, "Your show is a joke. I wish you could be more like the Young Turks." And this is just proof of what I've been saying for a very, very long time. Basically, half the audience hates most of what we do, and half the audience apparently thinks that we are too much like the Young Turks, and half that we are not enough like the Young Turks. At least the portion of the audience that even cares to comment about our show in relation to the Young Turks. But the great news is you can actually call in and talk to us about this. We'll be taking calls, live calls on the show. Let me tell you about that right now before we go any further. We have been, it has been demanded of us by popular demand that we start taking live calls on the show. Now, of course, the program is produced earlier than it is actually broadcast, and we're sort of racking our brains to figure out how can we take calls, and we have set up a studio number. That number is 617-830-4750. I'll say that one more time, 617-830-4750. We will be taking calls for the show Thursday, May 26th at 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time. Okay, that is the time during which we will open the phones to callers. Make a note on your calendar if you want to call in, if you like the show, if you hate the show, whatever. All callers are welcome. 617-830-4750. Ideally, these will be sort of quick calls, right? I mean, the good thing about when we do voicemails is if someone leaves a rambling 3-minute voicemail, we can just choose not to play it. There is a risk that we pick up the phone, "Hello, you're on live with the David Pakman Show," and it's a total train wreck disaster. And we're prepared for that. But all you have to do is be ready with your question or comment, 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time, Thursday, May 26th. I'm going to say the number one more time, 617-830-4750. I've mentioned this, and you've probably heard that Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, the two currently presumptive presidential nominees, are the most disliked presidential candidates in history. We have new data about this. And what better thing than data about how many Americans hate the two likely Democratic and Republican presidential candidates? This is from a new NBC News SurveyMonkey tracking poll out yesterday. And it tells us roughly 6 in 10 Americans hate or dislike both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Let's take a look at these numbers. Hillary Clinton is admired by 17% of Americans. 23% of Americans like but don't admire Hillary Clinton. And as you'll see on the right side of your screen, if you're watching with me, 37% of Americans dislike Hillary Clinton and 21% of Americans hate her. A total of 58% of Americans either hate or dislike Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is admired by only 10% of Americans and disliked by 39%, hated by 24% of Americans. Again, this is based on the NBC News SurveyMonkey tracking poll. So combined, 58% of Americans dislike or hate Hillary Clinton, and 63% of Americans dislike or hate Donald Trump. And this poll is not an outlier. The latest Washington Post ABC News poll released Sunday shows that 57% each say they have an unfavorable opinion of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And of that 57%, 46% say they have a strongly unfavorable opinion of Hillary Clinton, and just about the same number, strongly unfavorable opinion of Donald Trump. Question one is it really democracy when a majority of the country doesn't like either of the two likely presidential candidates? That's sort of question number one. But what that really gets me to is the disastrously low voter turnout in the primaries in the United States. Forget about the low turnout we have in presidential elections every 4 years, which is very, very low, hovering around 50% in many cases. Look at the turnout in the primaries. The turnout in the primaries is a disaster. And if we sort of think about this and carry it to its logical conclusion, on the one hand, we know that the more progressive candidate tends to win when voter turnout is higher. We also happen to know that Bernie Sanders has far higher favorability ratings than Donald Trump, far higher favorability ratings than Hillary Clinton. Put this all together, and it's abundantly clear that if we had more people voting in the primaries, we would have more candidates that we actually like by and large. This particular election cycle, the more progressive candidate and the more liked candidate happens to be the same person. His name is Bernie Sanders. So this isn't about me berating people for not voting. We have a real problem in this country with lack of voter turnout in the national elections. It is even worse in the primary elections. We are where we are. So the question now becomes, where do we stand on third-party candidates in the debates? I wouldn't vote for Jill Stein from the Green Party for president. I've said that before. I wouldn't vote for Libertarian Gary Johnson for president. I've said that before. But I am in favor of them being included on the national debate stage. And we've talked to different lobbyists and experts and activists around this issue of the national debates. And how can we figure out a way to include more voices than just the Democrat and the Republican? The big risk around these third-party candidacies, as we've been talking about, is that if there is a reasonable third-party challenger to Donald Trump on the libertarian, on the right side, not as a Republican, but as a either libertarian or an alternative Republican or whatever, that may please some right-wingers, but it would probably hand the election to the Democratic nominee. And along the same lines, if Bernie Sanders were to ultimately lose this Democratic primary to Hillary Clinton and run as a third-party candidate, as an independent, aside from the logistics of doing that, it would almost certainly hand the election over to Donald Trump. So this is a risk that we've been talking about. As far as the debate, there need to be more people debating than just these two very unpopular people, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Send me your thoughts. How should we figure out who should be on that national debate stage?
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined again by Jackson Katz, anti-sexist activist, author, and expert on violence, media, and masculinity. He is author of the book Man Enough: Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, and the Politics of Presidential Masculinity. Jackson, you know, when we think about gender and the 2016 election, most people's minds go to Hillary Clinton. We've heard allegations from Donald Trump that she's, quote, playing the woman card. I want to talk about that with you, but really, gender and masculinity in this election go way beyond Hillary Clinton being a woman, doesn't it?
Oh, yes, absolutely, David. When I set out to write this book, I was focusing on how Hillary Clinton's candidacy in 2016 was going to bring to the forefront or expose the gendered nature of American presidential politics in a fairly unprecedented way. But I, like many other people, couldn't predict that Donald Trump would then get into the race and be taken seriously by a significant percentage of the Republican electorate, to the point where gender became the central issue of the 2016 campaign. But the gender wasn't women, if you will, as represented by Hillary Clinton, but men and masculinity as represented by Donald Trump's candidacy. So I think his candidacy is all about his white manhood and his performance of a certain kind of aggressive, pugilistic white manhood. And so the debate has now shifted, I think, about the gender politics of the campaign, not just to Hillary Clinton and being a woman, and what implications that has for, you know, presidential politics in this campaign, but also how Donald Trump's masculinity and his support from a huge number of downwardly mobile white men has sort of reordered the political landscape.
Talk about that specifically. In other words, in what ways are we seeing that? Can we see it through the lens of particular issues, statements, events on the Donald Trump side?
Well, I think we can see it on that huge gender gap that Donald Trump has, even among white voters. I mean, obviously his candidacy has caught a wave, if you will, of interest and passionate support, not exclusively among white men, but overwhelmingly his supporters are white men, and that to me is not a coincidental feature of his popularity. It's the central feature. And if you listen to Donald Trump's supporters, if you ask them why do they support him and why do they feel so passionately about him, they say over and over again things like, he's a man, he stands up for himself, he fights back, he punches hard, he doesn't take any shit, he's got balls, he's not politically correct. It's not about his policy positions, although this stance has implications for policy questions. It's about his persona, his attitude, something that he embodies. And part of my thesis in Man Enough is that this is not a new thing in American presidential politics, that people who are voting for the president, when they're voting every 4 years, they're not just voting for a set of policy prescriptions, they're voting for a persona and a person who will embody the national manhood in a certain sense, because the president in the United States occupies a very powerful symbolic role. In addition to being the chief executive of the country, he, and it's always been he, also sort of in a sense personifies or embodies or represents literally the American manhood. And in a country that sees itself as a very masculine country, the United States of America, the person who embodies that role, who plays that role, who performs that role, has a very powerful sort of symbolic hold on the popular imagination.
Does this tie into the ideas and hypotheses that what is resonating amongst many Republican primary voters of Donald Trump is the underlying authoritarianism? And this has been proposed as an answer to the question of, well, hold on a second. Donald Trump is sort of the anti-evangelical Christian. Why are evangelical Christians overwhelmingly supporting Donald Trump? And what some have pointed to is this underlying authoritarianism of Trump's ideas and policies. Does this tie into your gender and masculinity analysis in any way?
Oh, yeah, totally ties in, because authoritarianism, as it's embodied around the world in political movements, is overwhelmingly represented by male-dominant political movements. So it's hard to even separate the notion of authoritarian political governance and gender, and specifically masculinity, and the reinforcement of a certain kind of a white, in this case, white male, patriarchal power. I think one of the other key connecting points between the evangelical right and Donald Trump, although on a certain level in terms of his personal resume, you would think that they would be horrified by him, he represents the defiant reassertion of the centrality of white male authority, which is a very big part of evangelical ideology, which is the analysis of a lot of right-wing evangelicals is one of the reasons for the decline of the country, as they see it, is that men have lost control to women, heterosexuals have lost control of the agenda about sexual orientation to the gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgender movements, and parents have lost control over their kids. In other words, the way to reinscribe and go back to the way that things should be is to reinforce white male patriarchal power in the family and in the political system. And so they can overlook some of the cruder aspects of Donald Trump's serial adultery and mistreatment of women and sexual objectification of women, because in a larger sense, he embodies the white male leadership that they aspire to.
Let's talk a little bit about the Democratic primary as we've seen it. Earlier in the primary battle between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, we started seeing the early stages of attempts to cast Bernie Sanders as the guy who shouts down women and trying to introduce or cast Bernie Sanders in some way as sexist. My argument is that it did not really catch on, but talk a little bit about your observations regarding the gender dynamics within the Democratic primary a little bit.
Sure. Now that's a very, I think, interesting development that's happened in the Bernie Sanders campaign. I think what Bernie Sanders embodies, in a certain sense, is a kind of street fighting white Jewish and ethnic Brooklyn kind of masculinity that has been missing from Democratic Party discourse for the past 40 plus years, as the Democrats have put up a candidate after candidate who is kind of cautiously centrist and corporatist, and in their personal style is very cerebral but not very pugilistic in their affect. If you look at the last several Democratic nominees, they've been very smart and talented individuals, but they haven't been at all channeling a kind of anger and aggressive kind of defiance of the rule of the billionaires or the 1%. Bernie Sanders does that. Bernie Sanders, even though he doesn't look particularly impressive in the more traditional sense of what a president is supposed to look like. And again, that's all coded with assumptions, and I appreciate that. But he does have this the persona that he fights back, and he'll take on the hard power source, the sources of power in the 1% and make the billionaires pay their fair share. And I think that a lot of voters on the Democratic side, including a significant gender gap that he still has, Bernie Sanders, in terms of his support for more men than women, people can relate to that and resonate with that. It's very complicated, however, because he's running against a woman who is, if she's elected, going to be the first woman president of the United States, which is a phenomenally important, symbolically important, as well as in other ways important development. So irrespective of the political differences between them, him being to her left, her being much more of a centrist, moderately liberal candidate, irrespective of those differences, the gender politics are very interesting, because you could argue that Bernie Sanders has a platform, if you will, that will help women in many fundamental ways on a class level, but he hasn't been able to articulate, I think, very effectively how his analysis is broader than just a class analysis, and incorporate the centrality of the gender issues in a way that Hillary Clinton can. And even though she's not as progressive as he is on economic issues, she's the one who's constantly bringing up abortion rights and reproductive rights and pay equity issues, to the point where progressive voters who are keyed into the importance of those issues have a significant conflict.
In thinking about potential national debates between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, can you give us a sort of preview of the ways in which the sort of reality that Hillary Clinton is a woman and Donald Trump is a man could play out in the forefront of viewers' minds? In other words, in what ways could gender sort of take a backseat during those hypothetical potential debates that we see? And in what ways could gender come to the forefront of viewers' minds?
Well, I mean, I think if it's going to be Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, I think the whole election is about gender. I think it's inescapable, and it's going to come up in so many different ways, both overtly and subtextually. It's actually fascinating. If we can remove ourselves from the political implications of what would happen if Donald Trump is elected president, which I think would be a disaster for democracy. And just taking it one step removed and thinking about it in terms of just as a case study in a sort of national referendum about the state of women's advancement versus the state of the backlash against women's advancement, it's like right out of central casting, Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. Because Donald Trump, in addition to his other political views, and again, his racism and his bigotry is obviously an important part of his appeal to a certain sector of the white Republican electorate. He's also, the way that he talks about women, the crude way that he talks about women, the highly sexually objectifying way that he treats women and has talked about them for decades and decades. If he was elected president, in spite of all that, what a statement that would make about where we are as a society, about how important it is, how gender equality is important, because we would be saying that if he was elected, that a majority of the voting electorate of the United States and America in 2016 has elected a man who is transparently misogynist, and it would be such a statement about how far we have to go. On the flip side, Hillary Clinton, as a woman, has to present herself not just as a woman running for president, but as somebody who's capable of leading the country, if you will. And so on foreign policy issues, where she's been criticized very strongly from her left as being hawkish, a lot of that hawkishness plays in her favor because it undermines the idea that a woman has to prove her manhood. Well, actually, it doesn't undermine that. It reinforces it. It undermines the idea that a woman is not strong, quote unquote, strong enough to be the commander in chief. Because if she's being criticized from the left for being too hawkish, that actually plays to her advantage among more moderate and centrist voters who like that aspect of her persona. So gender is all over the place in this conversation. David, one thing I want to make sure that I mention is a big part of my book, Man Enough, is about how the Republican Party has successfully, I have to say, manipulated white lower middle class and working class men for decades now into voting against their economic interests. And my argument is that it's not just about coded racial appeals or so-called wedge issues. It's about the subtext of both race and gender. And I think that the Republican nominees over the last 35, 40 years have won a huge percentage of white male votes. And Barack Obama cut into that in 2008. He cut into the white male advantage that Republicans have had. And he was elected in a significant victory in 2008 and then reelected in 2012 with very little white male support. And remember, Barack Obama lost by 25 to 27% among white male voters. The Republicans know that in order to win a national election, they have to win an overwhelming majority of white male votes. So they have to nominate candidates who can keep up that percentage of difference, because they know they're going to lose the women's vote. They know they're going to lose the people of color vote.
Right.
They have to win an overwhelming majority of white male voters. So you'll see in this coming campaign cycle all kinds of ways in which Donald Trump will be attempting to present himself. He's already been doing it, obviously, as the candidate that a quote-unquote real man should support, especially a real white man. The question is, can Hillary Clinton cut into Donald Trump's support among white male voters? Because if she can, and she's doing very badly on that score in the polls right now, if she can cut into his majority among white male voters, she'll win in a landslide.
Right.
So much of the campaign is going to be about this gender and racialized gender split.
All right, the book is Man Enough, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, and the Politics of Presidential Masculinity. We've been speaking with the book's author, Jackson Katz. Jackson, always great to speak to you.
Likewise, David. Thank you very much.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The number of women who now claim that 78-year-old comedian Bill Cosby sexually assaulted them has climbed to at least 58. The charges span decades from basically the middle of the 1960s through the late 2000s. The stories are often similar. Dozens say that Cosby drugged them before the alleged assaults. The accusations span 19 cities, 11 states, and even cross our northern border into Canada. Currently, Bill Cosby is facing multiple lawsuits as well as a criminal prosecution, which we have just learned will go to trial. Yesterday, a judge ruled that, yes, there is enough evidence against Cosby to go to trial. Steve Kornacki from MSNBC was confused between Bill Cosby and Bill Clinton. We know Clinton has had his fair share of trouble with sexual assault accusers, and this happened yesterday when attempting to report about Bill Cosby.
A very busy political news morning, but again, we're going to begin with that breaking news we told you about at the top. Right now, out of Pennsylvania, Bill Clinton is set to arrive at Bill Cosby is set to arrive at a suburban Philadelphia courthouse any moment now for a key hearing in his criminal sex assault case.
Excuse me, yeah, I'm not Bill Clinton. So what now? Well, it could be a year or more before Cosby goes to trial. Defense lawyers are going to be battling to keep Cosby's deposition from Ms. Constance's civil lawsuit out of the trial. That is a hugely damaging deposition, Lewis. In it, Cosby admits that he pursued young models and actresses for extramarital affairs. He admits that he obtained and used those infamous quaaludes on women that he hoped to seduce. Seriously, does anybody think that this guy is innocent? And every time I say this, the same anti-feminists and men's rights activists email me and they say, David, have you forgotten about the presumption of innocence in the United States? No, I've not forgotten of that. I get it. Innocent until proven guilty in the criminal sense. A lot of these cases have passed their statute of limitations already. It has expired on many of these, of course. But what I'm saying is that, colloquially speaking, I tend to look for the simplest explanation. And it is very, very difficult to argue that there is some conspiracy ranging over nearly 50 years from 58 different victims to conspire against a 78-year-old comedian who is going blind and has trouble even getting around on his own, according to his attorneys, because of how bad his eyesight is. Now there's this conspiracy to falsely claim that Bill Cosby sexually assaulted 58 women, and all the stories match in so many ways. That is a very hard thing to believe, Lewis. So I'm not saying put Cosby in jail, because I feel like he probably sexually assaulted these women. All of the standard allowances of our justice system will be allowed for Bill Cosby, no doubt about it. But colloquially speaking, this is not a great guy with women. Can't we say that at least?
I'm perfectly comfortable saying that. I'm also perfectly comfortable saying OJ did it, and he was found innocent, wasn't he?
Yes, although in the civil trial, it was found with a different standard, of course, not a reasonable doubt, but a preponderance of evidence. It was determined more likely than not that he did kill his former wife and her partner. So yeah, I mean, there actually is some legal basis, be it, although civil, not criminal, totally different standard, no doubt about it. So yeah, I mean, if what I want you to tell me, if you're angry with me, don't email me saying, David, you're pretending like people aren't innocent until proven guilty. No, I'm not pretending that. There's no doubt that that's the reality. Bill Cosby is criminally innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah, just because you say that he's guilty of this stuff doesn't mean that legally he's guilty of it. Just in your mind, he is.
No doubt about it. Email me and tell me how you explain 58 women over decades and decades alleging this situation took place, particularly now when the guy is 78 years old.
Might I add, none of these women are going to get any money out of this.
No.
Yeah, I'll add that as well.
No doubt about it. Let's talk a little bit about Adidas. This is a super interesting story on a number of levels. We've been talking about automation and automation-related unemployment. I've told you about mining trucks in Canada being automated. I've told you about Wendy's now announcing they will be replacing real human employees with order-taking kiosks. And now the world-famous shoe and sports apparel manufacturer Adidas, which I'm actually told, Lewis, is properly pronounced Adidas, but I don't think we're going to do that on the show. Is that fair?
No, it's too late for that.
Yeah, I'm still going to call it Adidas. They are going to start manufacturing in Germany again. They are leaving Asia, and they are going to restart manufacturing of shoes and sports apparel in Germany. Sounds really expensive, right? Well, no, because they are going from Asian workers to robots in Germany. 20 years ago, when you saw worldwide manufacturing move to Asia, Adidas stopped making stuff in Germany. And now they are going back, but with automated factories. They're creating a 4,600 square meter factory, which is going to automate shoe production. Shoe production for Adidas is mostly done by hand in Asia, purportedly, allegedly, presumably, by very little hands, if you know what I mean, Lewis. This will not only enable shoes to be made faster, but it's also going to reduce the carbon footprint because the shoes are going to be manufactured closer to many of the actual sales points and sales locations. And Adidas has similar plans for an automated factory in the United States next year. Subcontractors of Adidas in Asia, in China specifically, declined to comment. Some of them said, we haven't heard anything about this. I am thinking, Lewis, to 20 years from now, when the automated factories will go back to Asia because the maintenance of the automated machines will be cheaper in Asia than it is in Germany.
Yeah. I didn't know Donald Trump was making shoes in China. Small hands. Anyway, yeah, this is, it's an interesting move. It makes sense from the company, I suppose. It's about money. They've determined that this is going to save them money. And while the working conditions in China for these children or whoever it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
But how reliant are they on these jobs that we outsource to them where they are making almost no money? I mean, if we bring all of these jobs back to the U.S., what happens over there? Should we even care about what happens over there?
Well, that gets me to issue number one, which is, I've said it before and I will say it again. The argument that we should consider not automating, or that companies will consider not automating because it will kill jobs, whether it's in the United States or in China, although in China it might eliminate some child labor, which would be absolutely fantastic. It's a total non-starter. You will win nothing with that argument. And I go back to when people said, let's not develop cars. Whoa, I punched my mic and I apologize for that. Let's not develop cars because it's going to put people who work in the horse transportation industry out of jobs. It's laughable to think that that would have worked. That's sort of issue number one. Issue number two is arguably even more important. The jobs that Donald Trump says he will bring back no longer exist, and even fewer of them are going to exist 5 years from now. The low information voter who hears Trump say, I'll bring back jobs from China and Mexico, jobs which his companies exported to those countries, by the way, but that's a whole separate issue. Most of those jobs don't exist anymore. Many of them don't, and most of them won't in the future. Manufacturing is going to come back to the West, but it's not going to need any people.
I would like to see, we can make the same arguments about green energy and other things. I mean, as the automated technologies become more prominent, people do need to manufacture those machines. We need the programmers, we need the machine shops, we need the robotics, we need the construction workers to build these huge facilities. And so I don't know if ultimately all the jobs even out in the end. But
they don't. I mean, in other words, what you're pointing to is that oftentimes new technologies create whole new industries, and that's absolutely true. The difference, though, is that historically, more jobs were created by the new technology than the number that were eliminated. And now we have an understanding that the technology that is now being developed net destroys more jobs than it creates.
Right. But we hope for that utopian future where the robots provide for everybody, right?
Yeah. We might not even really need people. We could have robots live our lives too. I mean, I don't know that we need people at all.
Some people already do that
right.
Online in games.
So the silver lining is there will be less child labor, hopefully, if these companies move out of using factories in Asia, unless they plan to hire 12-year-old engineers and IT people to manage and program the robots, but hopefully that won't happen. Although, never speak too soon. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Call anytime. Here's a voicemail I received.
Hi, David. I've been watching your show. My name is Gwen Carter, and I really do enjoy it. And I was watching the segment that you was discussing regarding Kim Davis. And what I find interesting is she said she can't issue marriage to same-sex couples, but she's issuing marriage licenses to people who commit adultery. And that's the 7th commandment of the 10 commandments. So my question to her is, how are you issuing marriage license to those people, but you can't deal with the same-sex marriage?
Yeah. Well, obviously, it makes no sense whatsoever. There's no. If you're looking for a logical answer to that, there is no logical answer to that. Kim Davis is citing the Bible for her opposition to granting gay marriage licenses only when it's convenient to her. I have not heard of her denying anyone who has cheated. I have never heard of her even inquiring as to whether someone has cheated when she is granting a marriage license.
We're talking about someone who has been involved in 3 marriages or so herself.
Yeah. This is hypocritical even without talking about other people who have cheated. I mean, she also she has not escaped sin, Lewis, is I guess what I'm getting at. On today's bonus show, zookeepers have killed 2 lions to save a suicidal man. We will also talk about Nile crocodiles found in Florida. And we have learned that a famous BMX biker had chronic traumatic encephalopathy, yet another instance of the growing spread of CTE and brain injury. It's not just football. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.